Look at the soldiers. We are over 100 soldiers here. And the federal government is not doing anything. The soldiers are suffering. Salary is not enough. Jubilation every day. Look at where they are keeping us. No fan. The weather is very hot in Sokoto. You can see this fan. There's a soldier fanning himself with this fan. This is how we survive for over how many years now?
Breaking news. Nigeria soldiers back. End bad governance protest. Cite economic hardship.
Where they shout from, I no get joy. I no get joy. You can't be killing my brothers and sisters. I left them behind to fight Boko Haram. You can't be killing them and you want me to have joy. I don't have joy in this country. Whatever the youth are doing, I'm in support of them. Life and direct. Be you who. I no get joy for this town. I'm a soldier, but I can't support bad thing.
Nigerian soldiers fighting on the front lines of the country's counter-insurgency operations have come out in support of the upcoming End Bad Governance protest. The nationwide protest, scheduled to take place from August 1 to 10, aims to bring attention to the prevailing hardship, hunger, and bad governance plaguing the nation. According to sources within the military, the soldiers are not immune to the economic hardship and bad governance that has affected millions of Nigerians. According to them, the current government, led by President Bola Tinubu, and previous administrations have impoverished those in the lower cadres of the military. We soldiers here in Borno are in full support of this protest due to the hardship in the country. One soldier told Sahara reporters, "Everything has gone up in price, and our salaries can no longer sustain these current prices. We need urgent intervention, or things will gradually go out of control." The soldiers revealed that they have been forced to sell their personal belongings, including cars, televisions, and housing properties, just to make ends meet. "There's a hunger in all army barracks right now," another soldier said. "Soldiers are selling their property to survive till the end of the month. We need palliatives in the barracks as well." The military personnel emphasized that they are not just fighting against insurgents, but also against poverty and hunger. "We're human beings like every Nigerian," they said. "Our salaries and allowances are too poor. We're in support of this peaceful protest on August 1st. The current situation in the country is very unfortunate and worrisome." A staggering 97% of soldiers are in support of the protest, according to one army personnel. "Only the corrupt generals and commanders are against the protest," they said. "We junior soldiers are also victims of bad government. We cannot feed our families because our salaries don't last a week. Nigerians should come out and protest. It's their right. The suffering is enough and unacceptable anymore." The federal government of Nigeria has failed woefully in its duty to provide for the welfare and security of its citizens. The fact that soldiers, who are meant to be the defenders of the nation, are now struggling to make ends meet and are forced to support a protest against the government's incompetence is a clear indication of the depth of the crisis. The government's failure to address the economic hardship, hunger, and poverty that has ravaged the country is a result of its wickedness and corruption. The ruling elite has consistently prioritized their own interests over the needs of the people, looting the country's resources and leaving the majority to suffer. The fact that soldiers have to sell their personal belongings to survive is a shame on the government. The government's incompetence is evident in its inability to provide basic amenities like electricity, water, and roads. The education and healthcare systems are in shambles, and the country's infrastructure is crumbling. The protest against bad governance is a wake-up call to the government to take responsibility for its failures. It is time for the government to acknowledge its mistakes and take concrete steps to address the suffering of the people. However, given the government's track record, it is unlikely that they will take any meaningful action. The government is too busy enriching itself and maintaining its grip on power to care about the suffering of the people. Therefore, it is up to the people to take matters into their own hands and demand change. The protest against bad governance is just the beginning, and it is time for Nigerians to rise and demand a better future for themselves and their children. The soldiers also need to join forces with the civilians and demand change. The hardship and suffering affecting the country is not limited to civilians alone. It also affects the military personnel and their families. Complaining about the government's incompetence and corruption is not enough. Sitting down and lamenting about the situation will not bring about change. Action is needed, and it is needed now. The soldiers and civilians must come together and demand change. They must take to the streets, protest, and make their voices heard. They must refuse to be silenced and refuse to be oppressed. The government has failed to provide for the basic needs of its citizens, and it is time for the citizens to take matters into their own hands. It is time for a revolution of the people, by the people, and for the people, a revolution that will bring about change, a revolution that will fight against corruption, a revolution that will demand accountability from the government. The time for complacency is over. The time for action is now. Let us rise up. Let us make our voices heard. Let us demand change. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children, and we owe it to our country. Therefore, I call on the soldiers to come out and join the protest against bad governance. You cannot just stand by and allow civilians to fight your battle for you. The hardship and suffering affect you too, and it is time to demand change. Together, civilians and soldiers can make a difference. Together, you can bring attention to the government's incompetence and demand accountability. Together, you can fight for a better future for yourselves, your families, and your country. Remember, the government's failure to address the economic hardship, hunger, and poverty is a result of its wickedness and corruption. It is time to take a stand and demand change. The current state of Nigeria is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The government's incompetence and corruption have created a perfect storm of poverty, hunger, and desperation. If something is not done urgently, the consequences will be catastrophic. The soldiers and civilians must refuse to be divided by the government's tactics of ethnic and religious manipulation. They must unite in their quest for a better Nigeria. The government's failure to provide for its citizens is a clear indication that it has lost the mandate to rule. It is time for a new leadership, a leadership that will prioritize the welfare of the people, a leadership that will fight against corruption and ensure accountability. The protest against bad governance is just the beginning. It is a wake-up call to the government and a signal to the people that they have the power to demand change. Let us seize this moment. Let us make our voices heard, and let us fight for a better Nigeria. The Nigerian government's response to the protests against bad governance is a classic case of victim blaming. Instead of taking responsibility for its failures, the government is trying to silence the protesters and blame them for the country's problems. This is a tactic that has been used by oppressive regimes throughout history, and it will not work. The protesters are not the problem, they are the solution. They are the ones who are brave enough to stand up to the government's incompetence and demand change. The government's attempt to divide the protesters by portraying them as enemies of the state is also a failed strategy. The protesters are not enemies of the state, they are the state. They are the citizens who make up the country, and they have the right to demand accountability from their government. It is time for the government to listen to the protesters and take their demands seriously. It is time for the government to take responsibility for its failures and work towards providing a better life for its citizens. If the government fails to do this, then it will be clear that it is no longer fit to rule. The protesters will not be silenced, and they will not be defeated. They will continue to demand change until it is achieved, no matter what the cost.
We must protest. Hungry day. We must protest.